Hello friends, once again this is Yeshua Lebowitz from Elijah Speaks, and I'm going to be doing something different today. You're not going to see me at all. I made up a fancy graph for you guys, a chronological graph, and that I'm going to impress you with all this knowledge that I have, It's going to be amazing. So, if you're not familiar with Daniel 77s, almost every pastor in the entire world butchers this passage. They try to work it out to where it's regarding the coming of Jesus somehow. And that's a bunch of bullshit. It has nothing to do with Jesus. So what I want to say is once again, nobody said this ever, alright? Nobody before me, nobody after me. It's going to be new for you. Okay, now Daniel, if you're not familiar with Daniel chapter 9, okay, it's towards the end of the passage. Daniel is praying. He asks guidance over some of the visions that he's had. And then Gabriel swoops in and says, "Hey Daniel, there's some crazy stuff that I want you to see." And he says to him, 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, it's towards the end. Now you see it says to finish transgression. Alright, transgression hasn't been finished even after Jesus died on the cross. Transgression is still in the world. He's talking about perfection. To put an end to sin. That's perfection, right? So this is in the future. To atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. To seal up vision and prophecy means that no more prophecy. It means that whatever's said has been said regarding in Isaiah and Zechariah and all these different books in the Torah about the future and what God is going to do. It's going to seal it up. It's going to put an end to it. This time period. It's going to put an end to all prophecy. So it's in the future. It hasn't happened yet because we still have prophecy that is waiting to be fulfilled. Right? We still have this, Revelation, and we have all different things that happen in Revelation that haven't happened yet, that are far from happening. Now I want you to look at the graph real quick, and you'll see the divisions that I set it up. On the top, I have the time periods that he's given, and they correspond with the bottom blue line, which is the actual time that's going on and the events that are happening. So top part is the years, bottom part are the events. Now I'm going to continue reading on in the passage so you hear more of what it has to say. Know and understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. On a wing of the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Now this time period I have after the Gog and Magog war. If you ever read in Ezekiel towards the end, it's Ezekiel chapter 38. There's a war, a huge war that happens when God isn't that famous. Nobody knows about him, nobody cares. And then all the nations of the earth come against Israel, fight against Israel, and are defeated. This happens elsewhere in the Torah, but I'm not going to go in the Gog and Magog war. I'm just saying this is in between that and Yeshua Meshiach's millennial reign. This time period leads up to that, Yeshua Meshiach's millennial reign. Or you Gentiles like to call him Jesus Christ. Alright, so this is about a period of 490 years. That's the 7 70s. 7 times 70 is what? 490? Yeah, 490 if I got to get out my calculator here. Yeah, it's 490. And then you have the 7 sevens, which is 49 years. And then there's the final 7, which is at the very end of the time period, the blue line. And that's the final 7 years of the tribulation. And in the middle of that 7, all the bad stuff starts happening. So, at the blue line, in the beginning, we have the Anointed One and the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now today, Jerusalem has been rebuilt. Jerusalem is there. Jerusalem is standing. Well, guess what? It's going to be destroyed again. Yes. After the Gog and Magog war, according to Zechariah, in Zechariah, it is destroyed. And most of the population again is led off into exile. And then God himself comes and fights for Israel. And in Ezekiel, at the end of Ezekiel, it destroys Gog and Magog. But this is after the destruction again of Israel, or not Israel, Jerusalem. So after this, there is the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Israel is going to be restored. Now there's a big difference between today, Jerusalem, and the new Jerusalem that's going to be after the Gog and Magog war. The temple is going to be rebuilt. The temple is necessary for the coming of Jesus Christ. And now there's another thing they put in there, and that's the Anointed One comes. The Anointed One is a special person who we'll get into. He's called the Prince. He's spoken of in Ezekiel, and he's also spoken of in Daniel, towards the end. He's called the Prince of the Host, which I can read that passage for you. He will come during this time. It says, "No one understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens." So during this time period, the Anointed One comes, and the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem happens. Somewhere in this period. And I can tell you why I do not believe this is Jesus Christ, because the Antichrist comes at the very end of the very 490 years. The Antichrist is a very specific person. We know that. He sets up the abomination that causes desolation, and which is mentioned in this passage, which is mentioned in Matthew, mentioned everywhere. Jesus mentioned it. So we know that he is not, this time period is not going to be the time period of the coming of Jesus. Because if this was the time period where Jesus comes, then the Antichrist should have already been done and gone, man. It's been 2,000 years since Jesus came. And where's the abomination that causes desolation set up in the temple? I don't know. You tell me where it is. You bunch of freaking scholars and morons out there. I read so many commentaries. All you are a bunch of freaking morons, man. Don't know anything. They're all retarded. Alright. Now I vented my frustration. Alright. Let's carry on. Alright. So, Anointed One comes. Now, if you look at the first Jubilee, alright. Now, go to the 7 sevens. The reason I say this is the first Jubilee is because if you know something about the Jubilee, it says count off 7 years. Okay? And after 7 years, count off another 7 years until you get 49 years. The 50th year is a year of Jubilee. It's in Leviticus. I put the verse here, Leviticus 25, chapter 25, verse 8. The 50th year is the Jubilee year, the year of restoration. I do not think that the Jubilee year will end after this. I think it'll be a continual Jubilee year, a continual rest year after the first 7 sevens. The God's people will enter a period of rest. And that's why I put the period of grace. I put it as 440 years after the first Jubilee. God's people will possess their inheritance. They will possess the land that God has promised to them. And they will have that land for 440 years. I think it will be a continual Jubilee, a continual rest. And for time, God's people will have rest. And then I put some random Bible verses there regarding what the rest will look like. Israel is restored, Amos 9:11. One's life exceeds 120 years, Isaiah 11. The lion lays down with the lamb, Isaiah 11. Knowledge of God fills the earth, Isaiah 11. In Zechariah it says that the entire world will hold Israel up on a pedestal as a highly exalted people. 10 Gentiles will grab onto one Jew and say, "Take us with you. We know that God is with you. Show us your Lord. Show us your God." And the anointed one that I have spoken of, that comes, he'll give judgment from Mount Zion for a time, in a time of trouble. This isn't a perfect time, it's a time of trouble. It says that in the passage. It says it will be rebuilt with streets and a trench regarding Jerusalem, but in times of trouble. So we're not in a time of complete perfection. Sin is still there. Things are not perfect. And we have to understand that we're not yet to Jesus' time. This is a different time. Our time of restoration and a time of blessing that comes to Israel and it comes to the entire world. Now I want you to follow the timeline towards the end. Now here we have the final 7, the beginning of the tribulation. The covenant between Antichrist and the followers. When that covenant is made, that is the beginning of the tribulation. These people are going to come. They're going to, once again, they're going to ransack Jerusalem. From the text it says. They're going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. And he's going to set up his abomination that causes desolation, spoken of in Matthew. He'll set himself up to be great as the Prince of Hosts. Daniel chapter 8, verse 11. He set himself up to be as great as the Prince of Hosts. They took away the daily sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was brought low. Because of the rebellion, the hosts of the saints and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did. The truth was thrown to the ground. Now, once we live in this world, where the temple has been rebuilt, the sanctuary becomes desecrated. There's a great man, the prince of the host, who gets overthrown, who gets cut off. It says there in Daniel chapter 9 that after 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. This is the prince of the host. He'll be cut off. He will no longer have the sacrifice. He will no longer have the temple of God. He will be cast aside, thrown out like some beggar. Maybe he'll be put in prison. But I know that one thing, things will not go well for this person. He will be completely cut off. But I know that that's not the end of him. I know that he'll be delivered. Because after this, Yeshua Meshiach's millennial reign begins. And we know that Jesus comes back after this, after the 7 years. So, I guess I want you to see how this works and how the time period happens. I also threw in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It speaks of this rebellion that is spoken of in the Torah. God, at this time, before the Antichrist comes, God is ruling on the earth. God has restored the earth. The earth is a better place than it is now after the Gog and Magog war. It is a peaceful place. And then there will be another rebellion after the 400 plus years. This is very different than what you've heard. Nobody told you about this, I know. Not a single person. But it's there, and it's here. Now I want you to see this and learn from it and know that this is not the end of things. This is just the beginning when you see these things. You'll see the beginning of restoration. You'll see the beginning of a new man. Things will be perfect. No more sin. And we'll get a taste of it even before Jesus comes. You don't believe that men can stop sinning now. But just wait. You haven't seen what's going to happen in the future. Gog and Magog war hasn't happened yet. There's going to be a complete change in everything after that war. And we'll get into that war later, the Gog and Magog war, and how it changes everything. How it puts an end to the world we know now. We might as well call that World War III. This is the world that I'm speaking of after World War III. And I'm getting you ready for that world. Because it's going to happen soon. So I want you to see this and study for yourself all these things. Read the verses, pray about it, and see if this is what if I'm telling the truth. Test the spirits. Am I lying? Because this is a huge thing if I'm saying this. That the earth is going to be restored before the coming of Jesus and after the Gog and Magog war. And I think the scripture is pretty clear about that, about the coming restoration. So let that be all I'm going to say right now. This is a pretty nifty graph. Study it, eat it up, read the Bible verses that I've given you at the end of each title, and let it bless you. And may you have a blessed day. Amen.